Okay, we're learning the book of Ezra, and at the very end of Perek Gimel, we find that the Yidden, the 42,000 people that showed up, less than 10% from Rosh Hashanah, they began bringing all the korbanos, including the daily tamid and the musaf and everything else, and we discussed halachically how that was possible. And they also began laying the foundation of a new Beis HaMikdash, right? The foundation of a Bayit Sheni. And as they were laying the foundation of the Bayit Sheni, there was tremendous singing and rejoicing. Baruch Hashem, we're able to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash. But it mentions that there were older people who had remembered the first Beis HaMikdash. Remember that this is being done 52 years after the Churban, not 70, 52 years. I'll explain the 70 in a moment. And therefore, there were people who remembered what they had 52 years before, and they were crying and weeping and sobbing because the Mikdash Sheni was much, much less than the Mikdash Rishon. I'll explain that in a moment as well. And the Posek actually says that the sound of the weeping and the crying was even louder than the sound of the singing and the rejoicing. Now, in what way would they be crying? Why would they be crying? I mean, they're rebuilding the second Beis HaMikdash. So what is making them sad? So there are really three different ways of understanding why are they sad, ranging from the political to the most spiritual. Politically, remember that when we had the first Beis HaMikdash, we also had Jewish sovereignty. We still had Malchus based of it. Yeah, the 10 tribes were exiled, but we were in our country, in our land, with our government, with our melech. As opposed to now, we're rebuilding, we are simply vassals or slaves to the kings of Persia. So you could say that they were crying because we're under the shalita of the Umos Ha'olam, as opposed to our being independent before. That's reason number one. Reason number two would be the magnificence of the building. And here we need to make a very simple point. When you look at the pictures of the second Beis HaMikdash, or drawings or models of the second Beis HaMikdash, that is not referring to the second Beis HaMikdash that they're trying to build right now. That is referring to the Herodian temple, which Herod made a beautiful, gigantic Beis HaMikdash, which only lasted, it's an amazing thing, the second Mikdash was destroyed in the year 70. Herod completed his temple in around the year 30. So that whole magnificent Herodian temple was only 40 years, only lasted 40 years. The original Mikdash that Ezra and Nehemiah built, for which they're only laying the foundation now, is a much simpler, smaller structure. So when they remember the magnificence of Shlomo HaMelech's Beis HaMikdash, and they're comparing it to even the foundation of what's going to be a very simple building. So they're crying over how diminished the Beis HaMikdash is. And the third reason is more profound spiritually, and that is the Zakanim understood that the holiness of the Bayis Sheni is going to be much lower, much inferior to the holiness of the Bayis Rishon. And there were things in the Bayis Rishon that did not exist in the Bayis Sheni, among which the Aron HaKodesh with the Luchais did not exist during the Bayis Sheni. Yoshio HaMelech, before the Churban, hid the Aron HaKodesh under someplace in the Temple Mount, actually, but we don't know where it is. They have different stories that in the 19th century, somebody claims to have found it, and they actually brought a map to the Chavetz Chaim, and they showed the Chavetz Chaim where the Aron HaKodesh could be found, and the Chavetz Chaim burnt the paper and made the person swear that he would not reveal it. The Raiders of the Lost Ark narrative is not so far from the truth, and that is, if we would encounter the Aron HaKodesh now, we might very well be burnt up. It's not for us. It's not for us yet. So in the whole second Beis HaMikdash, there was no Aron HaKodesh. Now, if you ask me, Akasha, well, just because they lost the original one, why couldn't they make another one after all? You make a new menorah, you make new Bigdei Kahuna. If you lose something, you make a new one. The answer is very pashut. there wouldn't have been any problem in making a new Aron. But the value of the Aron is not the Aron. The value of the Aron is it contains the luchais that Hashem gave to Moshe. If you don't have those luchais, you're gaining nothing by making a new Aron HaKodesh. So without the luchais, it's not like a menorah. A menorah, if you lose the old menorah, you make a new menorah because there's a mitzvah of hadlakas haneros. If the old mizbeach got puzzle, like the Greeks contaminated it, you make a new mizbeach. Just like we're going to make a new mizbeach. That's fine. But there's no logic to say if you don't have the Aron HaKodesh with the luchais, you make another Aron. What are you going to do? Put in fake luchos? You can't do that. Although somebody told me that this is just mishugas in America a little bit, that in Lakewood, somebody put together a Shabbaton, which is kind of a Shabbos in Yerushalayim. I don't know if you saw this. It's really crazy. They duplicate the Erev Shabbos storefronts on Geula with all the stores and the same thing. And then they even have a makeshift kotel where you can put in, they say, be in Yerushalayim without even having to come. I mean, okay, it's just, there's a certain, okay, be it as it may. We're not going to make the Aron without the luchais. So the second Beis Hamikdash didn't have an Aron HaKodesh, didn't have the luchais, didn't have nevuah except at the very beginning, Chag Yisrael Malachi, didn't have Urim V'Tumim. Remember, as we explained, the Kohen Gadol did have the breastplate, but not the prophetic mechanism. So Memela, the newer people who never knew the first Mikdash, they didn't have a sense of what was lost, so they would just rejoice in what they're getting. Masha'en came the Zekanim, who remembered the Kedusha of the first Beis HaMikdash, they wept and they sobbed, because on one hand, Baruch Hashem. I mean, in a way, I'll give you a parallel. When you come to the Kaisel, right, let's say now you come to the Kaisel, or even if you're those people who go on to the HaRav itself. So what do you feel? On one hand, you feel tremendous joy. What does a person feel, let's say in 1967, when we finally have access to the Kaisel Maravi, the western wall of the HaRav? So on one hand, such joy, such simcha. On the other hand, what is it? It's a remnant of something that was totally destroyed. And there are mosques in the Makam Kadesh. So something can be a tremendous sense of joy that Baruch Hashem, at least I'm connected to this. But at the same time, you can be very, very sad because it's not yet what it's supposed to be. So the new people didn't know what the old thing was, so they sang and they danced and they rejoiced. The Zekanim knew how much was missing, and that gave them great, great sadness and suffering. Okay, but be it as it may, we seem to be progressing apace. We started the Korbanos already. We're laying the foundation of the Beis Hamikdash. Everything seems good. But then we get to Perek Dalet in the book of Ezra. And again, remember, Ezra has not been mentioned yet. The book is called Ezra, but Ezra is nowhere to be seen. Ezra is still in Persia or Babylonia. And Perek Dalet begins the following way. Vayishma'u tzarei Yehuda u'Binyamin. The enemies of Yehuda and Binyamin, because those are the main two tribes that returned, heard ki b'nei hagayla bainan heichal Hashem Elokei Yisrael, that the people who have returned from the exile are beginning to rebuild a temple for Hashem. Vayikshu el Zerubbabel el Reshei ha'avos, and they approached Zerubbabel, who is the governor. He's kind of the king of the Jewish people here. And the Reshei ha'avos means the heads of the groups. Vayamru lahem, and they had a proposal. Nivna imachem, let us build with you. We want to partner with you. This is a non-Jewish population. I'll discuss in a moment who they would be. Let us build the temple with you, ki kachem nidrash le'elokechem, because we too worship the same God. We also are not of the Avodah Zarah, we worship the same God. Now here, this fascinating, v'lo anachnu zovchem. So this is really very fascinating. Throughout the Torah, Nevi'im, and Kesuvim, there is occasionally a divergence between a Kri and a Kesiv. Right? That's a feature of Tanakh. Kri is the way the word is read. Kesiv is the way the word is written. And sometimes it may be a totally different thing. Sometimes there may be no word, it may be a blank, and there's a Kri that we fill it in. In other words, the Ksiv is literally invisible. There is no Ksiv, but there is a Kri. Sometimes there may be one word and you read it another word. For example, commonly when the Torah talks about women being violated, forcible rape, there's a certain expression the Torah uses, and we would regard it as semi-pornographic, and the halacha l'moshe misinai is you just read to lie with. The typical word for intercourse in the Torah is simply a man lay with a woman. Now, that's a very mild expression. In fact, what is written is something that would be a little bit more extreme. Again, this comes from halacha l'moshe misinai. It's written a certain way and it's read another way. Kri and Kesiv. Now, with respect to the Torah, the origin of Kri and Kesiv is actually fairly simple, because Hashem gave Moshe the words to write down, and the Masorah how to pronounce them. So, Kri and Kesiv, it's not that one is right and one is wrong. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Moshe, write it this way and read it this way. In fact, in one way, the most extreme example of Kri and Kesiv is the Shem Havaya itself, the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Right? The Yud Kei Vav Kei has its own internal pronunciation, but we're not allowed to say it. So we read it either Aleph Daled Nun Yud or sometimes Elokim, depending on the vowelization. So the origin of Kri and Kesiv in Chumash is Mipi HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's no question, both variations. Once we talk about, however, Nevi'im and Kesuvim, it is a little tricky, because that goes back to a question that we discussed a way long time ago, and that is, how were the books of Nevi'im and Kesuvim written down? In other words, Nevi'im had prophecies from God, for sure. But did God dictate the word for word that they write down, or did the Nevi'im write it down in their own language? Meaning, what's the difference between Torah and Nevi'im and Kesuvim? Some say that in Torah, every single word was dictated by God. In the case of the prophets had visions, but God did not tell them the particular words to use. They wrote the words, or they wrote the nevuos in their own language. Okay, that's not apikorsis. There actually is a very legitimate view that all prophecies are from God, of course. But the language the Navi used was not a dictating language, meaning they wrote it as they understood their nevuah. In fact, that is the meaning of the well-known statement in Chazal that Ein Shnei Nevi'im Misnavim B'Signon Echad, that two prophets do not prophesy in the identical way. They have visions, but each expresses it in their own words. Now, that's fine, and we can accept that. But the question then becomes, well, wait a second here. If the Navi is writing the book, what is the origin of the Kri and the Ksiv? Like, what did the Navi write down? By the Torah, it's Hashem dictating both things. By Nevi'im, it would seem that if the Navi is writing a book in his own words, he either did it this way or he did it this way. Because God is not dictating it. It's the Navi using his own words. So the truth is, there's a Radak. Again, if a rabbi would say this today, he would be put in Chayrim. But this is the Radak, one of the great Rishonim, Rav David Kimchi, one of the great Rishonim, biblical commentators. In fact, the Ramban, who is of the next generation, has a beautiful pun. The whole Kimchi family were great grammarians and biblical commentators. Rav David Kimchi Radak is the most famous. His father was Rav Yosef Kimchi, the Radak's brother. Famous Parshanim and Balei Dikta. So the Ramban said about the Kimchi family, Im ein Kemach ein Torah. What does Pirkei Avos say? If there's no flour, there's no Torah. He said the Kimchi family preserved the Torah. So the Radak is a very authoritative parish, and the Radak actually suggests that Kri and Kesiv reflects an uncertainty in manuscript transmission, meaning to say that when the Chachamim canonized and they decided which books of Nevi'im are holy and which perhaps are not holy, they sometimes had different manuscripts. And Kri and Kesiv, so Kri is their decision. What is the authoritative reading? But they preserved the alternative reading as a Kesiv. Now, as I say, if somebody were to say that today, they would be condemned as an apikoros, but this is what the Radak says. However, I do want to emphasize, this is extremely important, the Radak is not referring to the Torah, Kri and Kesiv. That for sure, it comes from Moshe Rabbeinu, and there are no mistakes in transmission of the Torah text. But in the prophetic text, the Radak is willing to say that there were manuscript discrepancies. That's one view. Another view is that maybe the Navi himself is doing the same thing that God did with the Torah, meaning the Navi is giving you a primary reading, but he's suggesting a secondary drash. In other words, the Navi himself is building in that double meaning. Okay, be it as it may, here we have an absolutely fascinating Kri and Kesiv in the book of Ezra that you would not pick up orally. You'd only know it if you see it in the actual words. That is the word lo, right? Lo is a very interesting Hebrew word because lo can have two different meanings depending on whether it's lo with a vav, lamed vav, or lo with an aleph. Lo with an aleph means no. Lo with a vav means to him, right, to him. So here is interesting. These non-Jews, and I'll discuss who they may be for a moment, are trying to petition Zerubbabel and Yeshua, the Kohen Gadol, to be able to participate in the building of the Beis Hamikdash. And their claim is that we too worship God, v'lo anachnu zovchim. Now, the Kri is Lamed Vav. And to him, meaning the Almighty, we bring sacrifices. But there's a Kesiv that says you spell it Lamed Aleph, which means we don't worship him. Now here, the meaning is very, very clear. The Kri is the open meaning. The Kesiv is the surreptitious hidden meaning. So this is exactly a beautiful thing. They're saying, "V'lo anachnu avdim," we worship him. But in their heart, it's lo with an aleph, right? So why both readings are preserved are very, very clear, because the Navi, or Ezra who wrote this book, Ezra is being merames that even though externally perhaps they worship God, but their intention is not l'shem shemayim, right? So that's why the Kesiv is Lamed Aleph. The Kri is read as if it's Lamed Vav, because one is the external meaning and one is the internal meaning. And they say, we worship God, we bring sacrifices to God, and they even give a date. Mimei Asar Chadon Melech Ashur Hamale Osanu Po. We have been doing so from the days of Asar Chadan, the king of Assyria, that brought us here. So right away, we now know who these Goyim are. Asar Chadon was the king of Assyria. Now, Assyria, which was eventually conquered by Babylonia, which was eventually conquered by Persia. So Assyria is long gone. But Assyria was the great, powerful empire that exiled the 10 tribes, destroyed the 10 tribes, and was going to destroy Yerushalayim, but there was a miraculous victory the first night of Pesach, in which Sancheriv's army was totally destroyed. That's one of the miracles that happened the first night of Pesach, and it is even alluded to at the end of the Seder in the different miracles that happened. Vahi b'chatzi alayla, in the middle of the night, etc. miracles that happened on Pesach. Now, Sancheriv happened to have many, many names, and one of his names was Asar Chadon. Now, the exile of the 10 tribes happened more than 100 years before the destruction of the Beis Medrash. So we're talking about now, therefore, 152 years, or more than 150 years earlier than this point. Now, Sancheriv was a very vicious dictator, and Sancheriv invented a new policy in the ancient world, and that is the notion of transporting populations, the notion of gullus. Even before Sancheriv, of course, kings would kill and enslave, but Sancheriv invented a new idea of transposing populations. He would take one population, move them to one country, and take another population and move them to this country. The whole idea of gullus, exile, we kick you out, we settle you somewhere else, and we bring other people to be here. This was Sancheriv's invention, and part of his invention was that people get disoriented. They're not used to the climate, they're not used to new places, etc. And as a result, they're less able to organize and rebel. So Sancheriv took the 10 tribes and he exiled them to all sorts of places. But he also brought non-Jewish populations from far away, and he settled them in Eretz Yisrael. And one of the major groups that he brought to Eretz Yisrael and settled in Eretz Yisrael, and they remained there throughout even the years of after the Churban, the 52 years where there were no Jews in Eretz Yisrael, these were the Kusim. Singular is Kusi. Now, some identify the Kusim with who later became known as the Samaritans, the Shomronim, and there still are Samaritans that have various rituals. Whether these Samaritans, right, don't confuse them with Stukim, which are Jewish, these are the Kusim. The Kusim were brought to Eretz Yisrael in the days of Sancheriv. He kicked out the 10 tribes. He brought in the Kusim. They're called Kusim simply because the place they were taken from was an area called Kuta. Kusa. So Kusim are the people from Kuta. They settled in Eretz Yisrael. As I say, many say they became the nation that became known as the Samaritans, right? The Good Samaritan is memorialized in the Christian Bible, etc. And to this very day, the Samaritans have a big Korban Pesach ritual at Mount Gerizim. Some people like to go see it because it is interesting, although there's a very big shaila if you're allowed to go see it because it's essentially an Avodah Zarah service, But so what are you going? You want to watch Avodah Zarah because it resembles the Korban Pesach. It wouldn't necessarily be, don't take your date to a Samaritan Korban Pesach ceremony. Okay, although I have to admit, it probably is very interesting, but again, halachically, there's a very, very serious problem if you're allowed to go see it. Now, it is mentioned in the book of Malachim that the Kusim were very, very afraid of what they encountered in Eretz Yisrael, different types of wild animals. It actually mentions lions, probably mountain lions. And as a result, they turned away from their Avodah Zarah to believe in the God of Israel that they thought would protect them from the lions. So it does say they embraced the worship of God. Now, throughout the Gemara, there's a big, big machlokas. Mishnah and Gemara, what is the status of the Kusim? Are the Kusim Geirei Emes? Are the Kusim considered to be sincere converts? Or are they Geirei Arayos? Arayos with an aleph, not an ayin. It doesn't mean sexual. Are they converts because of external fear? And they're not sincere. Which means it's pashut to the Mishnah and Gemara that in the course of time, the Kusim were not meticulous in many, many mitzvahs. You can't trust them. That's for sure. But the question is, are they Jewish and they simply went off the derech? Or are they not Jewish at all? Big machlokas. Are Kusim Geirei Arayas or Geirei mitzvahs? Geirei emes. Geirei emes or Geirei Arayas? Okay? Now, The Gemara's maskana is that was a machlokas over hundreds and hundreds of years. But by the time of the Amoraim, the Kusim had intermarried so much that they have the absolute status of Goyim. So, what started off as a machlokas, are they Jewish or are they not Jewish, turned into a final decision that even if they were Jewish in the course of time, we assume that they're not Jewish. Now, once again, if you assume that the Samaritans are the descendants of the Kusim, the psak of the Gemara itself is that the Samaritans have the status of totally non-Jews. Okay, just in terms of a little background. Now, the Samaritans are the ones who are talking here, or the Kusim, because they're saying, we have worshipped your God ever since HaRav brought us here. What are they referring to? They're referring to exactly the story in Sefer Malachim that they converted because of the Arayas. Now, again, there would be a machlokas, are they Jews, are they Goyim? Apparently, since their attempt at collaboration is turned down, it seems to be they're regarded as Goyim. But okay, we'll look at that either way. Okay, so these are the Samaritans. Now, the Samaritans are a very interesting people because even if halachically they became Goyim, they did preserve many aspects of ancient ritual. They bring the Korban Pesach, albeit in the wrong place. They even have preserved a special form of Hebrew. That's actually very, very interesting if you're into the scholarly study of Hebrew language. This is Samaritan Hebrew, which is similar, but also significantly different. They have different versions of the Torah. They have a Samaritan Torah. Again, probably 85% the same, but no differences. We regard all of this as inauthentic, but nevertheless, these are traditions that they have maintained for a very, very long time. Samaritan Hebrew is regarded by linguists as a very distinct sub-language or dialect of Hebrew, dating from the time of the Bible, dating from the time of Tanakh itself. Right? The Hebrew language, we have biblical Hebrew, then we have what's called rabbinic Hebrew, Mishnaic Hebrew, which is kind of different, and then there's medieval Hebrew, and then there's modern Hebrew, which is Israeli Hebrew. These are different stages in the language. Samaritan Hebrew is kind of a horizontal offshoot on the other side. It was not part of the general development of the language, but it is indeed a distinct language, yeah.
Is it true that the Samaritans only received the Chumash and the Book of Yeshua and nothing else from the Torah?
Well, the Samaritans did not accept the oral law. So now again, there are so many different movements that didn't accept the oral law that people sometimes confuse them as one. The Samaritans are not the Tzedukim. The Samaritans are not the Karaim. The Tzedukim and the Karaim are Jews who simply did not accept the oral law. The Samaritans have a totally different history, and they were brought here by Sancheiriv, so they're here a very long time. But as they say, either they converted or they didn't convert properly, and even if they did convert properly, they have the status of Goyim, but they did accept a number of aspects of the Jewish ritual. They did not accept the Torah Shebaal Peh, but they are not Karaites, and they are not Sadukim. Okay, so that's what they mean when they say, we have been worshiping the God of Israel ever since Sancheiriv brought us here. And therefore, we want to collaborate with you. So Zerubbabel and Yeshua, Yeshua is the shorthand for Yehoshua, the first Kohen Gadol of the Bayis Sheni, says, Lo lachem v'lanu livnos beis leLokeinu. It is not for you and us to work together. We will build the Beis HaMikdash ourselves, as Kirish HaMelech commanded us to do. Now, they turned it down. So why did they turn them down? Well, first of all, note the following. When it says they approached Zerubbabel, it describes them as the enemies of Yehuda and Binyamin. Meaning, it doesn't say the Samaritans approached them. It says the enemies approached them, which means in their heart, they had enmity. They didn't want to build the Beis HaMikdash because they wanted to have a share in the Beis HaMikdash. Presumably, they wanted to sabotage the work. They wanted to prevent it from being built, as we're going to see, right? So Zerubbabel and Yoshua understood that their kavanah was not l'shem shamayim, which means even if halachically they were still Jewish, which would be totally on that machlokas, they did not deserve to participate in this. Now, more broadly, however, Poskim view this as a very important precedent regarding taking donations from non-Jews. We still have this issue even today, even in our campaign, right? Ohr Somayach campaign, right? We just had. Of course, you'd be amazed. You say over a weekend we make $3 million. You'd be amazed how fast $3 million can be used up totally. We're already out of money, but okay. We have to do perpetual campaign, 24/6 fundraising campaigns. But anyway, so the thing is that people ask me a question. Their father is not Jewish or whatever it will be, and they have aunts and uncles and cousins who are not Jewish, who would be happy to give money to a Jewish yeshiva that their relative is connected to. So the question is halacha l'maisa. Are we allowed to solicit non-Jews to contribute towards a yeshiva or towards a makom Torah? Many say it's not proper. Many say it's that Hachzakas Torah should come from Klal Yisrael. It should not come from outside sources. Other people would allow it, but the interesting point is that one of the makoros for that discussion about non-Jews contributing is the fact that Zerubbabel and Yeshua did not allow the Kusim to contribute to the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. Now, some say that this is not a raya because, once again, if you understand there's a specific concern that they're going to sabotage it, that has nothing to do with getting contributions. Others broadened it. Wait, now you may say, well, wait a second. How can you say that's no good? Didn't Cyrus give stuff? Well, the truth is, if you look at what Cyrus gave, Cyrus did not give them direct building materials for the Beis HaMikdash. Cyrus gave them food. Cyrus gave them tax benefits, tax breaks. They wouldn't have to pay taxes. You don't find that Koresh was mishtatef in the Binyan Beis HaMikdash itself, and therefore the Kusim are refused. Of course, this is not financial, this is labor, but they were told not to get involved in the Binyan. So without giving you a direct halacha l'maisa, this is one of the main proof texts on the whole issue of taking Hachzakas Torah money from non-Jews because the Kusim were not allowed to participate in the Binyan of the Beis HaMikdash. Yeah.
And wasn't there a recent scandal in the state of California? There's I've never heard about it before, but there's I guess an organization called Cars for Kids where they're advertising on just like public TV, like cable channels, and they're asking for funds, and they got caught that they were really trying to fund yeshivas.
Yeah. That was a big scandal, unfortunately. Big Chilul Hashem, Cars for Kids, which raised a lot of money, and the advertisements seemed to be neutral, and most of the advertisements were in California, so a lot of people thought the money would go to help kids in California, and it turns out it funds yeshivas in Lakewood, and they were using a lot of non-Jewish contributors, obviously. Putting aside the fraud and the Geneva Stas, putting that aside, they're obviously posking, and you're allowed to take donations from non-Jews. They're following a more lenient position. There are lenient positions that do allow it. Particularly, let me point out though that that's a little different because that is not. It's not truly a pure donation. Essentially, you could say it's like a business, meaning we're selling you a car, and the money's going to go to charity. Isn't that how it worked? You bought something for your contribution.
I thought it was that people donated their broken
or they donated the car. Okay. Yes, that's interesting. So donating the car would be the problem. On the other hand, selling for tzedakah to sell a car and get money, that I think for sure would be permitted because that's simply a business transaction, right? Yeshivas can sell stuff. We could sell stuff to non-Jews and use the money. So the problem would not be on the cash generating side. That would be mutter. The problem would be to solicit the donations of the cars. Yeah, that would be a problem for sure. Yeah.
Rabbi, I'm so confused as to why there could be an issue with a non-Jew giving tzedakah to build a synagogue or to help with Jewish communities.
Yeah, yeah. So part of it is not so much a negative judgment about the non-Jew, as you might assume, but part of it is it's considered a desecration of God's name that we can't get enough Jews interested in something to build a shul or build a Beis Hamikdash or build a yeshiva, meaning it's a desecration of God's name that we can't meet our legitimate religious and spiritual needs from within our community. Now, this has a modern application. You know, there's an organization, I don't remember the name, it's kind of Christians and Jews, and it was founded by a rabbi, by a very, very fine rabbi. I actually knew him when he was much younger, Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein, Zichrono Livracha. And in the course of, he was a very frum guy, and a brilliant fundraiser. Over the course of 20 or 25 years, or maybe 30 years, he had raised from Christian evangelical groups billions and billions of dollars that has gone to Israel in different ways. And in fact, many olim, sometimes you might find, if you're, they're married couples, that you might find a basket of food before Yom Tov and 5,000 shekel in an envelope saying, a gift from the fellowship of Christians and Jews. Now, the shaila is, am I allowed to take that money? Fellowship of Christians and Jews. So, again, Rabbi Eckstein the first fear you have is maybe a different issue, and that is, well, are these missionaries? Are these proselytizers? Are these trying to be Jews for Jesus or something? So Rabbi Eckstein was very, very meticulous that there was no proselytization that was involved. Okay. You can believe it or not believe it. Some people didn't trust it, and they would turn it down because they saw this as missionary activity. But let's assume, just for purposes of argument, that there's no missionary activity. Everyone is giving it out of a good heart. It's generosity of spirit. Are you allowed to accept it? So I have to tell you that this is not for yeshivas. This is just plain tzedakah or gifts to people. So Rav Elyashiv was very, very strict. Rav Elyashiv said that one should not accept tzedakah, the equivalent of tzedakah, from non-Jewish sources, because he said also that's a chilul Hashem, that the Jewish people cannot take care of their poor. So he was very, very strict, and he would paskin that people would have to give it back. Others are lenient because even if they say you're not supposed to take it, but if giving it back would result in insult, so for shalom you can receive it, which means you really shouldn't, but for shalom, keep what they gave you. Others have taken a permissible position. They've said you're even allowed to take it. You're even allowed to take it as long as it's not connected to proselytization or missionizing or the like. So there's a big controversy, and it's very nogea l'maisa. I don't think they give these gifts to single people, so you probably have not gotten a basket. But there are a lot of married couples, even in Ohr Somayach, that get these gifts, and it's a bit of an isayon to have to give it back. But this was Rabbi Yashiv's psak that you weren't supposed to take it. Okay, but be it as it may, one of the main proof texts is this story here. Okay, so now what then we have is the following, and it just shows you what their kavanah was in the first place. After they are turned down, they compose a lengthy letter to Cyrus, the Koresh, in Aramaic. The Sefer shifts to Aramaic at this point, in which they basically say the Jewish people are an evil and rebellious nation that is trying to build an alternative power source to rebel against your rule, and the construction of this mikdash is simply going to create a fortress where they can fight against your own army, and what's going to happen is that they will stop paying taxes, and the king will suffer a tremendous loss of revenue. And therefore they petition the king to forbid the continuation of this construction, lest it foment rebellion and disloyalty and instability to the Persian Empire. And they even invoke ancient precedent because 52 years earlier, the Jewish people rebelled against the Babylonians, which resulted in the destruction of the temple. So you see, Jerusalem has a long history of being a rebellious city. These must be the ancestors of Tucker Carlson or whatever it will be. And the parak ends that Koresh issued an interdiction that the construction of the temple must stop because of this sitna. Sitna means accusation. And it did not resume for 18 years. Okay, so this is a very, very sad thing. They laid the foundation of the second temple. The Tzarei Yehuda Binyamin wrote a sitna to Koresh. So Koresh, we think, right? Koresh is like Trump, right? We think he's on our side, but at the last he could just turn around on a dime. And he said, can't do it. Now, what's interesting is, for those 18 years, did they still bring the korbanos? Because remember, they started bringing the korbanos even before they lay the foundation. And we discussed halachically how they did that. So I'm just wondering, we don't have a clear makor. When Koresh did not allow them to continue construction, did he prohibit their bringing korbanos, or that he didn't care about? Let them bring their korbanos. As long as they don't have a building, they can't create a fortress or a place of revolution. I don't know. I don't know if there's a makor in Chazal one way or the other as to what is the status of korbanos in those 18 years. So we'll leave that, I think, maybe as an open question. I do want to point out that here's how you get the golden number 70. As I indicated, Koresh issued a proclamation allowing the Jews to return to Eretz Yisrael 52 years after the Churban. The next Rosh Hashanah, which is already the 53rd year after the Churban, they started bringing korbanos, and at some point after Sukkot, they begin to lay the foundation. Almost immediately, given the amount of time it takes to communicate, Koresh withdraws that permission, and that remains in effect for 18 years till the reign of Daryavish, the son of Achashverosh. We'll get to that. 52 plus 18 is 70, which means the second temple was built 70 years after the destruction of the first temple, but the foundation was laid 52 years after the Churban, and is then followed by 18 years of introduction. Okay? So that's how you get the 70 to the 70. Okay, we'll stop here.
Thank you for listening to this Ohr Somayach production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.